epic hero. In these last couple weeks of quarantine, I've actually been spending most of my time on study. When I'm at home more, or on the computer more, or just kind of like go monotonous type of life, I find myself relying on podcasts. I was actually like a stark no podcaster about like 3 years ago. In my brain, podcasts were like millennial white people sitting on couches, do these 5 simple steps to achieve the hustle. There's a whole other genres out there, podcasts that you can listen to. Most of them are by comedians, right? Because I think comedians tend to have a lot more of just like a realistic outlook on life. They can, laugh at the rough stuff, which I enjoy doing a lot more than like being soliloquizing about it. The top one that I've been listening to the most while I'm doing like sort of monotonous schoolwork is called the Gender Fluids Podcast. And if you're Austin local, you're going to love this because they are an Austin local comedian duo. I guess you have to have a certain dark humor flavor to be able to enjoy them, but they are a trans girl and non-binary lesbian who just smoke and shoot the shit about like fetishes and sex and gender. Very like different perspectives that they both individually bring to it. One of the trans girls like been in the sort of kink, poly, like super open, active queer scene for a while, and then like the non-binary lesbian is just kind of coming to that for the first time, and it's fun to sort of see her whole world open up. So if you have a dark sense of humor, I would say 10 out of 10, definitely recommend, and you'll learn a lot too. The podcast that I listen to mostly when I am just running around town getting groceries, or when I'm at home doing dishes, laundry, etc., is a podcast called the Self-Helpless podcast, which as a person who like literally needs a lot of help but doesn't want to admit it, this is definitely a perfect podcast. It's 3 comedians in LA doing the whole like stand-up comedian life who definitely make fun of themselves as being like neurotic and OCD and stuff, but don't actually talk openly about it and actually seek help a lot of the time. So they're kind of finally approaching that, and with a sense of humor, but still talking about some actually really cool self-help practices that we could all do with. For me at least, it's much less likely for me to get wrapped up in my own mental health, like depression, anxiety, whatever, if I'm hearing it discussed and getting some advice, but in a very lighthearted context. Another like super lighthearted one, just for when I'm going about my everyday, is called Doing It by Hannah Witten. She's one of my British YouTubers who I got back into back in the day, and she just has a podcast about, well, doing it, everything to do with sex, relationship, and our bodies. So it's very feminist, very empowering, very sex positive. She is one of the members of one of my favorite podcasts that ended last year that was called The Banging Book Club, which was 3 British girls reading a book about sex or gender every week. Feminist and sex positive content. And again, very casual, very lighthearted. And then for like some more meditative podcasts that I like to listen to, one of my top ones right now for like spiritualism is a podcast called Your Own Magic. And it's just really beautiful. It's really good for when I'm like coloring, drinking tea, winding down at night, or when I just need to be in like a calm headspace or reconnect to some spirituality. She brings in a host about twice a week, about every other week or so, who talks about some form of spirituality, whether that's they wrote a book that they channeled from the divine, or whether that's they do herbal remedies, or whether and work with natural medicine, or whether that's they're a poet and they think of that as a sort of channeling, or whether it's just like a way to reconnect your spirituality like to the original wholeness. But everyone that she brings on is like rather spiritual, and it's really cool for me to just hear more voices that are in that same vein right now. She has a really nice voice. I can get like nitpicky about like the clicking or the some scratchiness or something, but she's got a beautiful voice. Another podcast, which I don't know if they call themselves comedians, but like they pretty much are, which is a political podcast, like very basic political podcast that I started listening to 2 years ago, I think, when I was like distraught that I knew nothing about politics. And I think it's about time for me to graduate and like find another political podcast now that I know some of the basics, but this is a great starting point. It's called What Am Politics, literally. And it's these two guys, Irish guys, which again, the voices, accents, beautiful. Richie and Steve. And Richie is this guy who knows nothing about politics. And Steve, who I think is a politics major or something, but he knows a lot about politics. And so it's just the two of them having a beer and chatting about politics, you know. Steve educating Richie is basically the premise of it. And they follow current events, they also follow just like general ways that political things work, and then it's a really good starting point from just like ground zero. Anyway, that's my list of podcasts to quarantine to. I hope it was helpful, but if you have any podcasts to recommend, just put them in the comments below, especially if they're produced by comedians, lighthearted, feminists, all that stuff. Always remember that we are epic heroes today and every day of our lives, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.